In this video we're going to look at resistance to change. This is one of a series of videos on this topic, and it's advisable that you check out the others as well and make your own notes. But look over the other videos, that's for sure. So let's look at this one and see why there is resistance to change. Well, a model that is quite often talked about in this context is Cotter and Schlesinger's 1979 model, which identifies that there are four main reasons why people resist change. So we'll look at this particular model and see what the four reasons why people resist change, according to this model, what these reasons are. So we'll set it up as a little matrix to start, and then we'll discuss it in more detail. So we have reason, outcome and reaction, and we'll classify it under those headings. So for example, the first one, the first resistance to change, the reason why there's resistance to change, could be what's known as parochial self-interest, focusing in on oneself as opposed to the organization. And the outcome is expect to lose something of value as a result. So the reason why people are so focused on themselves as opposed to, say, the good of the business, the good of the company, or the good even of the community. They're focused in on themselves. It's parochial self-interest. And the reason to do that is because they expect to lose something of value if they don't. So they focus in on themselves, trying to protect their own position. And the reaction to this is political behavior. Now, political behavior can be, as we understand it in the news, with politics and politicians and government and so on. Or it could be political behavior in the context of planning and trying to persuade people to drop their opposition to certain ways of behaving and trying to win over people. So it could be political with a small p. But we'll see how it works in a few moments, because we'll talk about it in much more detail. But for the moment, the first reason that they identify for resistance to change is parochial self-interest. People are resisting the change because they're worried about themselves and their own positions. The second reason why we could have resistance to change is misunderstanding. And misunderstanding could result in low trust and a lack of trust. People misunderstand the situation. They don't trust who's saying it, and because they misunderstand it, they don't understand what the true meaning is. They might put their own meaning or their own interpretation on it, and it may lead to a mistrust of the people who are trying to promote the change. Most often this happens because of rumour. Mistrust and misunderstanding can be based a lot of the time on rumour. People think there's a hidden agenda, or they think that the change will do certain things or bring about certain situations, and they think. There's no evidence for it. It's not intended, but they think this. They're suspicious. So there's rumours, and the rumours feed the misunderstandings. It could be different assessments of the situation. Simply there's resistance to the change because different people are saying different things, and after a while others will listen to different views and different perspectives, and so in the end they get confused. There's sort of a mass confusion amongst a lot of people who are listening to different viewpoints and debates and so on, and they think, well, the best thing to do is to stay where we are because the change is very uncertain, and we don't want that. We want to minimize any disruption. So sometimes assessment of situations and the talk about different assessments of situations can lead to ambiguity and confusion in the mind of some people, and they'll start to resist the change. The outcome here is perceived changes unfavorably. It looks at changes unfavorably because of the assessments, the different assessments. Some people for it, some people against it, some people bringing up points that could happen and may happen, and so on. So people perceive the changes as unfavorable. And people also have different information. It often happens in elections in countries. Uh, Different political parties have different ideas and different positions on different things, and they all argue for what they believe to be best. But that can lead to confusion amongst the voters. They don't know which way to vote because they're not sure. They get confused. So they see change as unfavourable. They don't want change because it's too uncertain, and what people are saying is confusing. So there can be all sorts of disagreement over this. So different assessments, different situations. As I said, we'll talk about it again in a few moments. And finally, we have low tolerance towards change. And this is because some people are just basically very conservative. They don't want change. They are traditional, conservative people. This is the way it's been done. This is the way our fathers done it and our grandfathers, and this is the way we do it, and we're not going to change. So there's a low tolerance to change. They don't want technology. They don't want to engage the technology. They don't want to be a part of what we would call the modern world. They want to continue in their world, this traditional world. And there's also this low tolerance towards change may be based, and the outcome here suggested, it may be based on fears that they don't possess the skills or the aptitudes. Sometimes people oppose the change, not just because it's the traditional way and they want to keep the old way going, but because they themselves fear that they haven't got the skills, or they haven't got the education, or they haven't got the background to engage the change, to work with the change. They feel that they haven't got it, so they don't want it. They resist it. And the reaction would be making excuses and face-saving behaviour. They don't want it. They don't want it, so they want to make excuses. We don't want it because we're at that age where change is not in our interest, or we don't want it because we promote the traditional way of making things, and this new way is not going to have the same quality, and it's not handcrafted. You know, there's various perspectives here. So the point anyway is that Cotter and Sissinger's model, we've got 4 reasons: parochial self-interest, misunderstanding, different assessments of the situation, and low tolerance to change. So we've got 4. Let's look at these 4 in a little more detail, and that'll finish our class. It's quite a short class. So we'll start with parochial self-interest. Well, it's often human nature to put one's own interests before those of the organisation. It is human nature. We do look out for ourselves. And we know stories of people dying for their country, and these are the heroes. And we admire them. But a lot do not have the courage to die for their country. A lot don't have the courage to engage in big projects or make decisions that's going to lead to significant change, because they're going to jeopardize their own lives, their own family life. They're going to jeopardize their livelihoods and the way they're going to survive. So they look at themselves, and for that reason they oppose it. They're not going to engage in change. People put themselves first. It's often the case. I said we do know of exceptions, and we admire the exceptions. Many of them are wonderful people, depending on the cause to die for, I suppose. But many of them are wonderful people who put organisation or put country before themselves. But for the vast majority, it's suggested that they look out for themselves. They're trying to feed their families and have a life and get through life. So they're not going to engage in the changes. It results in politics or political behaviour. However, it can be formalised into one or more pressure groups whose objective it is to fail the proposed changes. So it's often the case that when a change is proposed, people will band together. People with the same self-interest will band together to try and oppose it, and they'll form a pressure group. It can happen within companies. Someone proposes a change to the production system, and the people affected, or who may be affected by the change, will band together. They'll form a group, and they will oppose it as a group, and they'll try to win the support of people who are not directly affected. They'll try to get widespread support for their campaign against the change. They're campaigning really to preserve their jobs and their way of working and their life, the way they spend their life, and also their livelihoods, their income that they bring home to live. So it may lead to political pressure, to agitation, and try to involve others in the formation of political groups or pressure groups to try and oppose the change. But one resistance to change, according to this view, is parochial self-interest. We do put ourselves first in many situations, and this model suggests in most situations. Now, misunderstanding. Well, employees are more likely to resist change when they do not understand the reasons for it or possible consequences. So when change is proposed and people don't understand it, they don't understand what's meant by the change, what it's going to do, and what are going to be its consequences, they're going to resist it because they're stepping from a situation that they know into one that they don't know. They're stepping into an uncertain future because of the change. So therefore they resist the change. This is common when details of a change are not communicated effectively or when there's a lack of trust between management and employees. If the change is not effectively explained, then people will not buy into it. People will not want it. It must be explained. Its implications must be explained. The outcomes must be anticipated and explained. It must be debated. All the possibilities of it going wrong must be debated. There must be complete exposure and transparency in the whole debate around any proposed change for it to be universally acceptable, that is. But even then, I say universally acceptable, there'll always be some people who will still oppose the change. And it may be that the whole misunderstanding comes from a mistrust between workers and management. The workers perhaps see management as looking for more efficiency and no compensation for them for working harder, and there's a mistrust, so they might resist the change. This has resulted in increasing perceptions of threat, of increasing defensiveness, and reducing further effective communication about change. So it could be that people stop talking about the change, which is bad, because what's needed before a change takes place and is effectively implemented is a lot of discussion, a lot of openness, and, as I said earlier, transparency. The workers and the management should be clear about the change, and they should be willing to go for the change. But if there is a mistrust between management and workers, then there will be increased defensiveness. People will not want to change. They'll want to keep their positions, and there'll be resistance. Differing understandings. It is human nature for people to evaluate situations in differing ways. Therefore, employees may perceive a situation differently from management. So employees may see situations quite differently from the management, and therefore may have different attitudes towards proposed change. So it's necessary to explain the proposed change fully, so that workers, management, and everyone's on the same hymn sheet. Everybody understands the same thing. There is no misunderstandings. So communications is central to overcoming this. It usually occurs as a result of management's assumption that everyone sees the benefits of the change as they do, and that everyone has the same relevant information, which of course is not the case. Everyone does not see the same benefits, and because they don't see the same benefits, they're going to resist it. So it's necessary to have communications, and perhaps the benefits of the change could be shared. Perhaps the workers who are working hard to perhaps implement the change could receive some compensation, some gratitude, some acknowledgement of their contribution. The situation is again likely to arise as a result of a lack of effective communications. Misunderstandings and communications are, in a sense, linked. Misunderstandings can arise when there is no effective communications. Low tolerance for change. Well, people differ in their ability to cope with change, to face the unknown and to deal with uncertainty. So there's a low tolerance for change. That could be the case. People simply do not want to change. They resist the change. They don't want it. They want to continue as they are for all sorts of reasons. But it could be because they lack skills or they lack the ability to acquire new skills, and therefore they resist change. That's all I'm going to deal with in this. So now we've got 4 further reasons why there might be resistance to change, in addition to various models that we looked at in other videos. But that's all I'm going to deal with here, so thank you for watching.